All right. So hopefully we're all here for what we're seeing projected, the Office 365 MCSA exam. So before we get started, one thing I want to mention about this session. So in the time we have here, I'm not going to teach Office 365. I can't do that in an hour and a half. I'm going to teach things like what to expect on the exam, what types of questions, things like takeaways for the objective domains, which you should look at or look forward to learning before you take an exam. We're going to run through fairly quickly. We may not spend all of the time we have allocated for this session. The deck is fairly small. So again, if you're here to learn Office 365 or learn what may be here on the actual exam, or you want me to tell you answers to the exam, it's not what this is today. It's more learning more about Microsoft certification, what's in the objective domains, and what you should take away for study items. So, with that, Neil McPhee, I'm a technical advisor at Harvard Business School. We are now implementing Office 365 where I work. We are really looking at several main things right now, moving our MySites to OneDrive for Business. We are looking at Exchange, moving our Exchange out there to Office 365. And we're doing several other implementation steps. And what I do, in addition to my technical advising, I'm an MCT. So I teach classes there at Harvard Business School, mainly to staff, mainly to other staff in other campuses. So I have a lot of individuals. And Office 365 is very hot right now, especially in universities, especially in large corporations. So get a lot of experience training there. So technical advisor, I do a lot of proofs of concept. I do a lot of coding. I do a lot of server builds. I do a lot of configuration planning, and mainly helping to advise the C-level what directions they should go, what pieces should be put in, and just think of tech ed as going to a big place where you're learning a lot of different things. Tech ed is where I go and bring a lot of that information back and say, what should we do in education? Or answer questions about how do we make this happen in an education type setting. So feel free to contact me via any of these methods here. So Twitter is my preferred. I tweet all the time. I get in touch with people all the time. Skype me if you have any questions about certification in general, or if you have any questions about Microsoft Office 365 certification, email me. I'd be happy to answer any emails you might have. And I'm an MCT, MCSA for Server 2012, MCSE for SharePoint 2013. I passed that free 74-409. I actually do a lot of virtualization work in the context of proofs of concept and things like that. So had the opportunity to do that. Exam, passed it successfully. It's a great exam. Still working on my Office 365. So I'm here telling you based on things that I've learned in taking the exam and failing it. So don't feel bad about failing an exam. Yes, ma'am. For Office 365, the components that do have some SharePoint pieces in them, they do refer to SharePoint 2013. To SharePoint 2013. So what we're going to do here, we're going to talk about Microsoft certification. We're going to have some discussion about what certification is, how it's changed, how some of the questions a little bit more rigorous, a little bit more comprehensive. Actually, I should say a lot more. We're going to do some exam tips. We're going to do some introductions to these two exams. We're going to talk about the objective domains, the percentages of what's happening in each exam, what is the weight of any of those questions based on the objective domain, which is subject areas. So let's talk about Microsoft certification. So for you, why does Microsoft certification matter? So it's increased confidence. So after you pass an exam, you're certified, you can say you have increased confidence in your abilities at work. You can say, I have passed this exam. I know what the heck I'm talking about. These are the products that I've taken a Microsoft exam about. You can say, here's my passing score sheet. I know all of these items that are on the passing score sheet. Enhanced product knowledge. In the process of studying for an exam, you're going to see things that you may or may not work with every single day. You're going to study items that you may or may not work with. And in studying for a Microsoft exam, you're going to expand your product knowledge, which is a great thing. Learn about certification to educate your coworkers and bosses. So you can actually learn more about the program, learn more about certification, bring in your coworkers, say, hey, why don't you work with me? Let's study together. Let's pass this exam together. So you can work on certification. You can also tell your bosses how much it matters and how much work you're putting in learning new areas in the product that you're studying for the exam. And hopefully let your boss know that, hey, me and my coworker, we're studying some great things. So for your career, makes a great commitment. So you're going to have to commit some time to a certification. You're going to have to study. You're going to have to actually go to the testing center. You're going to have to commit some money to taking that exam, and of course, making sure you know what that exam is covering. So it shows drive and initiative again. You're going and studying, making sure you go from 0 to passing an exam. If I was an employer and I saw one of my employees doing this, I'd say, okay, that person is driven. They want to go from just kind of knowing a few things to going and being able to pass an exam. So that's a great thing. So it sets you apart from your peers at review time. Yeah, you can do that. So recognition and completely achievable at Tech Ed. So we have exams here that are available. We have a certification center up on the 3rd floor above us here. Again, exams half off. They're only $75 US here, which is great. It's a great discount. We have a study hall that's available. Question? Okay. You look like you're about to say something.
I'm just leading in.
So we have a study hall with practice exams. We have a Safari 30-day subscription that's available. So any book that's in the Safari Books on Demand subscription, it's available here for free. So 30 days, you can pick any book, you can use it to study, and it's available after you're done with Tech Ed. So you go and sign in, get a 30-day subscription, use it after Tech Ed is over. In the study hall upstairs. It's right by the certification center. And you guys can take an exam here at Tech Ed, and again, certification is completely achievable. There's a testing center. It's great. So changes to certifications and exams. They're more relevant. The broader skill set, so it's testing a broader amount of skills, broader skill set, than just multiple choice. So you really have to know how to implement, how to plan, how to do various items, as opposed to just know the correct answer in an array of answers that a question is covering. So recertification. Every 2 years, there's going to be a recertification cycle. So I just passed my SharePoint exams. In 2 years, I'm going to have to go and retake those SharePoint exams because there's a recertification process. So it's not a certification for life. You really have to do recertification. I think the exams are also more rigorous. They are more difficult. They are larger in scope. You have to answer more difficult questions. The certification requirement has been upped. So you have to pass, again, more rigorous questions. You have to do pretty much more. Well, what we mean by certification requirement is we need to work on more. Well, let's table that for a second. And deeper skill set. You're going to have to know more skills. You're going to have to know them a lot deeper. You're going to have to know a lot more information to pass your exams. So we have additional MCSE and MCSD certifications. So what we see some new ones. We see MCSE Private Cloud. So MCSE, Microsoft Certified We have MCSE Business Intelligence, MCSE Data Platform. We have new MCSD, so web applications. That is relevant to the SharePoint areas. It's also relevant to devs, to development. So again, increased rigor. So reflection of the real world. Learn more, validate more. So they want you to learn more skills. They want you to know more about the product. They want to validate that additional information that you have learned to pass the exams. More complex exams, and the exams reflect that. So the best way to measure what candidates know is to ask questions on the exam to help evaluate what the candidates can do. Also, new item types. So there's fewer multiple choice. How many in here have taken a certification exam in the past? Okay. How many of you remember only multiple choice? Okay. So there's fewer exams that are only multiple choice. Ideally, almost all of the new exams and recent exams, they use additional question types. We have case studies that are involved. They're scenario-based. So I want you to see the big picture and make decisions on that information. So a case study will help you with things like functional requirements, business requirements, technical requirements, any information as far as troubleshooting. And they will also help you make decisions on how to answer. Yes, ma'am.
If they're more complex and they have the scenario kind of things, does that mean that the scoring is more subjective?
Well, it is more subjective. So how the exams are scored, we have more difficult exams with fewer correct answers and lesser difficult exams with more correct answers. Does that make sense?
I think what you're wondering about is the passing score difference because the questions are more difficult. And yes, typically the exams that are more difficult, require less questions to pass, and the ones that are quote unquote easier requires more correct questions that you answer correctly in order to pass.
I'm just wondering about these scenarios that you're talking about. I'm thinking that the scorer is looking for, you have to have these elements that you put down in your answer or something like that, as opposed to you just hand it in, they can scan it, this is your grade.
So the scenarios is still computer based. You still answer it multiple choice, A, B, C, or D. It's just based on a scenario. So you don't create a scenario. You answer your questions based on the scenario.
Thank you.
Excellent. David, for everyone who doesn't know, is our individual here at the conference who's helping out with explaining certification. And would you like to join?
So I'm just gonna thank you. I'm just gonna pick up here in terms of the item types. So one of the differences that you guys need to know is that when you're doing one of the two exams on Office 365, one of the exams has scenarios and the other one doesn't. So what are the exam numbers again?
346.
346, 347.
Yep.
So 346 will have multiple choice questions, we'll have drag and drop questions, hot areas where you click on the different areas in the screen. But 347 will have also build list questions. And a build list question is when you have a bunch of steps that you need to pick out and you have to choose them out of a list of additional steps, and then you have to put them in the correct order. So for example, you have to pick 4 out of 8, and then you have to put those 4 steps in a specific order. That's a build list. Then you have scenarios, which have a long, long scenario of information, and then 10 very short questions. So you'll only find that in 347. We'll pass to the next slide. So just quickly in terms of the expectations of the number of questions that you would encounter in an exam, you're going to get anywhere from 40 to 60 questions in an exam. Likely it's going to be in the low 50s, so 50 to 55 questions. The passing score is always 700. Now, just to your question before, 700 is always the passing score, but it doesn't always mean the same thing. So 700, to get to 700, sometimes you have to get 28 questions right, sometimes you need to get 37 questions right. Okay? So the question point value is modified in order to make sure that it always gets to 700. Right? So for example, if it took 36 questions to pass an exam, imagine 37 or 36 divided by x, or 36 multiplied by x equals 700. X is the value of each question point. No. No, so the question is, do you get any negative points when you get a question wrong? And the answer to that is no. There's no negative point, which means it doesn't cost you anything to guess. If you guess a question and you get it wrong, you're not losing anything. So if you only have 30 seconds left in your exam and you have 3 questions that you haven't answered, guess them. You're not going to be any off worse than you are right now. All right? If you're going through case studies, well, if you're going through an exam period, you can always go through the questions. So you can pass from one question to the next. So you go and 6 questions later, your brain realizes that 6 questions ago, you totally picked the wrong answer. So you can go back through questions throughout the exam, except through case studies. So if you have a case study where you have, again, this long scenario with 8 pages of text and 10 short questions, and you've completed those 10 short questions, and you move on to the next case study, you cannot go back to the previous case study. So you can go within the case study, but not outside of it. Yes, sir?
So they're not adaptive, so if they see them getting questions on X wrong, they don't ask more questions about that?
Okay, so the question is, are the Microsoft exams adaptive or adaptive testing? And they're not. So adaptive testing is based on how well you're doing in the exam, you are presented with different questions. And Microsoft exams are not like that. They are not adaptive. Your questions are predefined when you just log onto the computer. And you have a variation of the exam. Now, one thing that's important is that we have many different questions out there in our ecosystem. So you could be sitting next to someone else who's taking the same exam as you, and they'll have a different set of questions. Okay? It's more than likely that they will have a different set of questions. And one of the reasons why we do that is to fight piracy. So we want to minimize somebody's ability to game exam questions. And the way we do that is we have a lot of questions. So the more questions we have, the less people can game through the question or guess the answer of the question. What's great about Microsoft certification questions is that they all follow the same format. We kind of have a saying in exam development, it's dare to be boring. Okay? You just want to be boring in creating content. We're not trying to entertain the test taker. We want it to look plain, simple, and vanilla. And the benefit of that is that you just own in on the important, relevant information that you need to answer the question. You're not reading a romantic novel. You're reading dry, textual information about Office 365, which may be very exciting to some of you, but it's not meant to be entertaining. So all questions have the same format. All questions start off with what we call a business problem. So the business problem will always be the same. You have an Office 365 subscription. You plan to deploy a SharePoint solution, and that's it. So you have information about your environment, and you have an overarching goal. The overarching goal is you plan to deploy a SharePoint solution. It's very broad. It's not detailed. Like, I can't answer a question just based on this. But then I need the next component. And the next component is what we refer to as the goal statement. Now, the beauty of the goal statement is you can always identify it because it always starts with the same 3 words. You need to. You need to do something. Whatever that thing is, it is your goal. It is the goal of that question. You need to ensure that the SharePoint solution that has been deployed provides secure access to remote users that connect from Windows Phone clients. That is your very detailed goal. Okay? It's part of your overarching scenario, but it's your very detailed goal. And then you have your correct answer or your wrong answers. So the correct answer is going to answer directly that you need to statement. So from the Office 365 administration portal, click on the SharePoint tab, and then enable remote access. Okay? So that is directly resulting to that goal. And then we have our incorrect answers that hopefully will be completely wrong. Now, the important thing is that that goal statement is what you're trying to achieve. Everything else in the question is there to support that goal statement, is there to ensure that the correct answer is 100% correct. Not kind of correct, not sort of correct in this scenario, but 100% correct. And the same thing of the wrong answers. They have to be 100% incorrect. And in the exam development process, we have subject matter experts that pick and pick and pick at that stuff to ensure that the incorrect is 100% incorrect and the correct is 100% correct. All right? Now, the last thing I want to leave you with in terms of the content of the question is that they're not designed to be tricky. That is one of the big misconceptions that people have, is they think, you know what, exams, they try to trick people. We don't try to trick people. Quite the opposite. We want to ensure that if you are qualified on Office 365, if that's what you do as your job, this is what you do in terms of your career, you know what you're doing, you want a tool to represent your qualifications. What is that tool? That's a certification. Well, we want you to pass, very much so. If you're not qualified, we want you to fail. But if you're qualified, we absolutely want you to pass. And if we don't ensure that you pass as a qualified person, we have failed to develop a certification that properly represents your abilities and your knowledge. Okay? So certification is designed like this. It's not designed to be tricky. Don't believe the people that tell you that. And don't read too much into a question. If you're reading through the question, you're like, oh, what were they thinking? They're trying to trick me. Because they said 5 servers, but really there's only 4 servers that run Windows Server 2012. Well, there must be another server. They forgot. They're trying to trick me. They changed the information. It's not. Maybe there was a typo in the question. Okay? Maybe there is only 4 servers that run Windows Server 2012 and another server that runs something else. Maybe you're reading just too much into it. It's not trying to trick you. If you know the stuff and the answer is obvious to you, then great. Then that's the answer for you. Okay? Pick the answer that looks obvious to you. Most likely that's the correct answer. All right? Any questions on the format, certification, and all that fun stuff? Just one stuff, just to clarify what Neil was talking about is the rigor. Keep in mind, Microsoft certification exams are much more difficult than they were a few years ago. If you've taken an exam more than 24 months ago, Microsoft certification exams were not as challenging as they are today. And a lot of that is because people's knowledge has evolved and people know more today than they did several years ago. That's one of the reasons. Another reason is that the market has demanded exams that increase that relevance. That really, if somebody is certified, people want to know, can I really trust that person? So Microsoft has been pushing towards that relevance. So be ready. Don't walk in thinking, I deployed an Office 365 solution. I'm going to pass that thing, no problem. There's a lot of hybrid coexistence in there. There's complex ADFS environments. This stuff is complicated, okay? Make sure you know your stuff. And what Neil is going to go through is all of the various aspects of the technology in the objectives that you need to follow in order to help you pass this exam. So once you're ready, you can go upstairs, take the exam. You can pass it here at TechEd. We have also practice tests upstairs. Unfortunately, no practice tests for this exam, but we have practice tests for other exams that are absolutely free. All right? So upstairs, there's actually 2 official practice test vendors for Microsoft Learning, Transcender and MeasureUp. MeasureUp actually has practice tests for Office 365, but they're not here this week. So there are practice tests available. This vendor is not representing this week. We have the other vendor, which is Transcender, and unfortunately, they don't have this exam in their catalog.
Also in the study hall, we have access to Microsoft Virtual Academy, which does have content on Office 365 that you can use to study for this exam. So that's available upstairs too. Excellent.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to go through 2 exams. One, we're going to start with 7346, so Managing Office 365 Identities and Requirements. So this is one of 2 exams for the MCSA certification. So let's take a look at what this exam has in it as far as objective domains. So what we're looking at, the items with the percentages, those are what we call objective domains. That's the items that are covered in each of these exams. So we see a percentage. These percentages mainly have, I see some of these are 15 to 20%, 15 to 20%. Okay, so these vary. A lot of exams have very specific weights, but this exam varies in weight. And what I mean by weight is this exam will have 15 to 20% of the exam will have questions on Provision Office 365, 15 to 20% plan and implement networking and security in Office 365, and on down the line. So what you'll see is a varying variety of exam questions on each of these objective domains. And we have the link down there to the Born to Learn exam site and page where you can get some study resources, direct links to TechEd or TechNet, where you can go and study very specific items that relate to these objective domains. So let's take a look at these objective domains in detail. So provision Office 365. So within that objective domain, we have 3 subtopics. We have provision tenants, add and configure custom domains, and plan a pilot. Now, each of those objective domains will cover each of these items. So what we're going to do is I'm going to run through a series of sample questions. And in these sample questions, I'm going to ask probably, it's a small issue. I can poll, what some of these answers might be. And then I'll have takeaways based on what we select in the answer. And the takeaways are hints on what you should go and take a look at, what you should keep in mind for certification. Also, these questions have very specific items which I can point out and say this is what an exam might ask you or what you should look forward to in an exam, what format, things like that. So let's start with the first one. So you have to assign an Office 365 plan to users that do not require the full Office client. But you need to do voicemail. You need to do hosted voicemail. What's the least cost plan you must assign? So out of all of those, which makes the most sense? Office 365 Enterprise E4? No? Okay. E3? Okay. So in green, we have Office 365 Enterprise E3. So the reason why that is there, hosted voicemail. And it says, what is the least cost plan? So you can go up in cost and get hosted voicemail, but what is the least cost plan that you can subscribe to? So this is an example of, you have to pay attention to the question where they ask you very specific qualifiers for what plan you need to know. So the takeaway is you must know the difference between the various Office 365 plans. And they will ask you questions about the plans. They'll ask you which plan includes which feature. They'll ask you which feature requires, or which feature you can get with the least cost, as in this example. And they will ask you various questions about what plan do you need for various kinds of customers, small business, enterprise, academic, things like that. So it's not all enterprise. You have to know different plans, different types of customers, which level and which cost. So our next objective domain, plan and implement networking and security in Office 365. So a huge one, know how to configure DNS to make it work with Office 365. You have several different products. So you have Link, you have Exchange, you have SharePoint. All of those require DNS changes. Enable client connectivity to Office 365. What do you need to do for Mac clients? What do you need to do for Stream on Demand clients? What do you need to do for downloaded Office 2010? What do you need to do for those types of things? Administer rights management. Know the different features. Know what you need to do to make those happen. Manage administrator roles in Office 365. So a typical thing is know how to assign a password administrator. Those questions might be asked. Which is the lowest amount of credentials or permissions that you need to assign somebody to perform a task? Know what those might be. Know the difference between, say, a billing administrator as opposed to a global administrator. Know what the differences are between those. So know the differences between the plans. So plan and implement networking and security. So let's take a look at a sample question. You're an admin. You need to prove domain ownership. Which DNS record do you need to create? So okay. Yep, absolutely. So well, I was going to say now you can just have GoDaddy and have Office 365 do everything for you, but that won't be on the exam. So text record, absolutely right. So what's the second one that you can use? So you have text file. What's the next one? Okay. So look forward on the exam for DNS for the different kinds of records and know the secondary types of records they would want you to create or you can create. So know how to set up DNS for use with Office 365, including domain ownership, MX, SRV, and A records like auto-discover. So definitely know DNS, know which DNS records you need to create, know which order Office 365 would like them in if you can't create one. What's the next type they can interact with or they would like? So manage cloud identities. Here's another series of subtopics within that objective domain. Configure password management. Manage user and security groups. Manage cloud identities with Microsoft PowerShell. So one huge thing about this exam, PowerShell, PowerShell, PowerShell. There's a ton of PowerShell in this exam. So know how to do almost everything that you can do in the UI with PowerShell. It has to do with identity, has to do with managing the actual tenant, has to do with adding users, how you can add users to Office 365 and have it sync down or do single sign-on or single log-on. Know how to do those things. So you need to delegate administrator rights to user 1 to reset passwords, but user 1 must not be able to reset the password for other admins. Which role must you assign? Right, so get to know what is the lowest amount of rights you need to assign to make a task happen. So in this question, you have what someone must do, or you need to have someone reset passwords, but they must not do something else. What is also, but user 1 must not be able to reset the password for other admins. So that is, you can do something, but it cannot do something else. Know those relationships, know the lowest amount of privileges you can give to a role. So password admin, correct, I heard someone say that. Takeaway, know the difference between the admin roles in Office 365 and permissions required to do certain tasks. Definitely know this, there's a lot of content on these types of questions. So any questions up to this point? Yes, sir. So the question was, for the PowerShell, is it expected to know or memorize all of the commands? Not all of them, a majority of them. And I think something that is very important is know the difference between the commands for Microsoft Online, SharePoint Online, interacting with Link, and interacting for doing things with users. So a lot of those commands are very similar. Like know the difference between SP Online or MS Online, things like that. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. But you don't have to memorize. You don't have to memorize. I would add on to that. Look forward to drag and drop for what you need to do for parameters. So know the command and know which parameters might belong to that command. So look forward to that also. Yes, sir. The question was, do you need to memorize the DirSync PowerShell commands? It would be good to know. I don't recall any questions on that. However, they can change those questions at any time. So you may or may not need to know it, but it would be good to know. So implement and manage identities using DirSync. It's a good segue. So in this objective domain, we have prepare on-premise Active Directory for DirSync. So what do you need to do for your Active Directory? What kind of prep you need to do for it? How you would do that preparation? Any extensions you need to do for your local Active Directory? Set up DirSync, the actual DirSync itself, what server it needs to go on, what system requirements that server that you're installing DirSync onto, what those system requirements are. Know that it may not be able to go on an NT 3.1 or an NT 3.51 or something extremely random. Know that you can only install that DirSync tool on very specific machines. And there will be questions on that. Manage 80 users and groups with DirSync in place. So know what places you can add users, where you can bulk add users. Know where you need to add them if you want them to sync between local and Office 365. So implement managed identities using DirSync. Sample question. You need to force the directory sync immediately. What command do you have to run? Okay. Sounds like you guys have done this before. One thing I want to point out in this question, something you need to look out for, force and immediately. Look for those types of words. If they just said, how do you do it? Or tell me how, or in the question said, well, how do you sync users? You might have a different way to answer it, but force and immediately. Start online coexistence sync. There are many PowerShell questions in the exam. You must know how to operate Office 365 using PowerShell. I think we've been talking about that a lot. Now, the other thing about this slide is those other PowerShell commands, they exist, but they may not do exactly what you're looking for. So you wouldn't find any really wrong product or PowerShell commands that belong to SharePoint on-prem in your exam. They will all be things that do exist. They do something. You won't have any obviously tricky, wrong, misspelled, typoed PowerShell commands. So definitely know what does what when you're using PowerShell. So implement manage federated identities. So single sign-on. Plan requirements for ADFS. Install and manage ADFS. Things about the proxy. Know the ports. Know the permissions. Know the system requirements for what server you need to build for ADFS to go onto. And I think there's a lot of questions regarding ports in this area. What ports you need to open, what ports you do not need to use. So let's take a look at a sample question. So which port do you have to open between the proxy and the AD server? 389? Nope. 443? Okay. All right. All right, so again, these ports exist, they do things, they are involved with Office 365. So also know which ports you need to connect, various servers, various services, various components. So again, takeaway. You need to know the system and network requirements for ADFS. You also have to know how to set up, customize, and troubleshoot the ADFS server. So in the exam, you might have questions about how to troubleshoot an ADFS server that is not working correctly or not syncing correctly or the connectivity does not work. Know which tools, which techniques that you would use to make sure the connectivity works from your local AD to your ADFS server out to syncing with Office 365. So look forward to some of those questions. Yes, sir? No. Does not. So it doesn't include the most recent. So that's a great question. So does it include ADFS 3.0? So ADFS 3.0 is relatively recent. The exams probably have not been updated for the most recent releases or the preview releases. Get to know what tools are available, which servers are available, when the time period of the exam was probably written. A good example would be, in the exam, you might have something like OneDrive for Business. Well, what was it called before? SkyDrive Pro? No, SkyDrive for Business. Well, it's called SkyDrive before. Look for questions that would refer to the previous designation of Microsoft products. So we actually have a question about that. So monitor and troubleshoot Office 365 availability and usage. Analyze reports. Monitor service health and isolate service interruption. A lot of questions about monitoring. How can you find malware in your emails that are going through Office 365? How can you determine which services are up? What's the designator for services that have just failed and then Microsoft brings them back up? What does that little graphic look like in the service dashboard? Know what those things are. Know how to take a look at some of the reports that you have for mail flow. Other items. Look for...
So this covers Exchange Online stuff too?
Yes, absolutely. So monitor and troubleshoot Office 365 availability and usage. Lots of questions on these little icons. What do they mean? So what does this symbol mean in the service dashboard? Okay. Absolutely. So does anybody know why that is a checkbox with a green outline? So you can click on it and see what was wrong with the service. That may not be in the exam. That's something I learned. So get to know what all of those little icons mean in your service dashboard. Get to know what interrupted service means. Get to know service restored. Get to know all of them, because you may have questions about that. And it will most likely not be this one. So you have to know the meaning of the service dashboard icons and be able to interpret the status of the service. So that concludes 7346. Any questions about 7346 up to this point? Yes, sir. Well, they vary. Max is 60. I had a question in one of my other exam crams. In the beginning of a Microsoft certification exam, you have questions. How many years have you been working with this product? What's your expertise level? And a question was, based on your answers, you're an expert, you've only been working with it for a little while, or you're a beginner, or you've been working on it for years versus not so long versus you're new to it. The question was, if I answer those in a certain way, do I get more questions? Or do I get fewer questions? Do I get easier questions? Or do I get more difficult questions? So I would say max 60, but they vary below 60. You might get 40. You might get 50. You might get 42. But they come from a wide pool of questions. So anything else about 7346? I would say it's a very difficult exam. It's not the most difficult exam, but it's an exam. You have to, again, know a lot of PowerShell. You have to know the permissions. You have to know the roles. You have to know lots of infrastructure. You have to know, again, service and system requirements. You have to know ADFS. You have to know Microsoft Azure Active Directory. In the exam, it's called Windows Azure Active Directory. So get to know how that interacts with ADFS and how that interacts with Active Directory. There's a lot of information in 7346. So if there aren't any questions, I'm going to move on to 7347. So enabling Office 365 services. So again, we have skills measured. So fewer objective domains. So I think before we had 5. This is 4 with greater weights on plan for Exchange Online and Link Online. So before 346, I would say that is more implementing, planning, knowing the various pieces of connecting your on-prem out to Office 365. This is configuring, provisioning, planning, and managing things that have already been configured, things that you're already working with. So there's the different weights. You can expect 20 to 25% of managed client and end user devices, 20 to 25% of provisioned SharePoint Online site collections, 25 to 30% of configure, exchange, and link online. So you see this is way heavier towards the services within Office 365. So we shift from the on-prem, connecting that to Office 365, to the services that are in Office 365. It's the main difference between the two exams. And there's the Microsoft Learning page that has explanation, some learning pieces to it, some very good links to videos, to TechNet articles, to diagrams, and various other things within the study area for the exam. So let's take a look at the objective domains. Again, we're going to look at the objective domain and the sub areas of the objective domain. So manage user-driven client deployments. Manage IT deployments of Office 365 Pro Plus. Set up telemetry and reporting plan for Office clients. So what we can get from this is know the different places that you can interact with Office. Know stream on demand. Know where you can download the Office 365 Pro Plus. Where you can direct your users to download it themselves. Where Office web apps or where the online version of your mailbox is for users when they log into their dashboard. Also know how to plan to deploy enterprise-wide your Office software. So another sample question for this objective domain. You have to instruct users to access Office on Demand to access documents, where to go to access documents, and where to go, or where do they go to access Office on Demand. So what was your guess? Okay. So we have 2 votes for. So that's actually not a typo. That's a good observation. So look forward to the exam using previous terminology. So go to your SkyDrive Pro. So you have to know the difference between the full Office client, Office on Demand, and Office web apps. Know where a user would go to get those things. Know where you can direct your user to go and get those. Also, know any previous product names. This is a big gotcha. Know any previous product names if they come up on the exam. Until that exam is updated, previous product names will exist. They're updating exams quickly, but you might go and sit the exam a day after a product name has changed. You still have to know what it was called yesterday. So. Yep. And they have changed. So provision SharePoint Online site collections. Yes, sir. Yeah. I'm sorry. Let me get a little closer. Mm-hmm. Yes. I think that would be more in this exam. So that's concentrating more on identity. That's concentrating more on getting things set up as far as Active Directory, syncing it out to Office 365, knowing how to get users set up. This exam, 347, is probably geared more towards planning those types of scenarios. So we're going into provision SharePoint Online site collections. Configure external user sharing, create SharePoint site collections, plan a collaboration solution. So, does anyone know or not know what these items are referring to in Office 365? I think SharePoint Online is fairly straightforward. Definitely look forward to a lot of planning questions. What do you need to do for the equivalent of AAMs or alternate access mappings? Get to know what you need to do for different site collection types, what you need to do for your My Site, which is your OneDrive for Business now, but in this example, SkyDrive Pro. Get to know what you need to do for public SharePoint site collections, things that you want to expose out to the internet. What do you have to do Windows PowerShell management of SharePoint Online sites of Fabricam. Which command connects to the SharePoint Online for PowerShell management? So which one? So here's a great example of knowing the difference between connecting to Microsoft Online versus SharePoint Online. Know which PowerShell commands connect to either. Also, which items that you could use in a certain scenario that may not apply to what the question asks you to answer. So it says you need to do PowerShell management of SharePoint Online sites for Fabricam. Which command connects you to the SharePoint Online for PowerShell management? Connects you? Yes, sir. So one of the things that this doesn't show you, and what you might run into, is you've already imported the commandlets. You've already connected to Microsoft Online, or you've already connected out. If you just need to connect to your SharePoint instance. So are you asking how to connect to Office 365 itself or SharePoint specifically? Okay. Definitely watch out for it. It does. So it's a great question, and it's a great tip. Pay attention to the parameters that are coming into your commands. So yeah, technically you're right in this example, -admin. So I'm going to have to change that slide. Thanks. So let's take a look at the top one. So new PowerShell session, configuration name, Microsoft SharePoint, connection URI. That does connect to SharePoint. That creates a PowerShell session, but it connects on-prem. So know the difference between that. Also, in the example we're talking about, connect to SharePoint Online with our URL, with a -admin. So definitely look out for that. Connect to MSOL service. So what does that do? That connects you to Microsoft Online. So pay attention to what service you're connecting to, SharePoint Online versus Microsoft Online. A new CS Online session. That is another command for another piece. So takeaway, besides the settings you can configure in the web UI, you also have to know the basic SharePoint Online PowerShell commands to do SharePoint Online management. So definitely know how to do things in PowerShell that you would do using the UI. So here we're getting into the objective domain for configuring Exchange Online and Link Online for end users. So configure additional email addresses for users, create and manage external context, resources, and groups. Configure personal archive policies. So the keyword in there is policies. Get to know the policies that are required for you to manage items. Configure link end user communication settings. Get to know what features that you want to enable in your environment. Know how to turn them off, how to turn them on, things like that. How to create policies, archive policies. Get to know how to do various policies for interacting with mail, with link. So let's do another example question. Configure Exchange Online and Link Online for end users. You need to configure public IM conversations for link users. What settings do you have to enable? So choose all that apply. There's another type of question that you'll run into on the exam. It's not choose one, choose two, but choose all that apply. So there might be more than one. Actually, there will be most likely more than one that you have to choose to make this happen. So which, in your opinion, do you need to? So you're going to have to know how to modify all the settings, make sure they are all done in a list, make sure you're choosing the ones that apply to the actual task in the question, and pay attention to a couple other things. Public IM. Pay attention to what do you have to enable. Choose all that apply. So pay attention to those question, I guess, hints or designators. Pay attention to what the question is asking.
That would seem a little tricky because you can't choose both external access on, set the clock, and access on, except for like, you choose one or the other.
So, yep, you're right. Say again?
You could do 2 and 4 or 3 and 4, but you can't do, right, 2, 3, and 4, correct?
Very good observation. Be familiar with the Office 365 Admin Center, set up a trial tenant, and play with all the options. So this is a good gotcha. What do you need to do? What will work? What won't work? If you have one option versus the other option. Know, in this example, choose all that apply. All of them are chosen. Only one would work with the other option. The other one would not work with the other option. So know what will work, what won't work. Sorry, I'm trying to play it off as, hey, I really meant to do this, but it is a good gotcha because the slide's wrong. But, yes, sir.
So in that scenario, if that was the question, what exactly the answer? B, C, and D? They would catch it. They would clarify it. You wouldn't leave it that way.
Yeah, it would be clarified. You would probably have to go back to the case study, take a look at more specific information. I mean, a question like this might appear where it seems to have the possibility of either or and something else. Definitely take a look back at the case study, and that might clarify what is being asked.
Or it might say something like, you want to enable some domains.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. So plan for Exchange Online and Link Online. Manage anti-malware and anti-spam policies. Recommend a mailbox migration strategy. So we talked about how do we do local mailboxes to Exchange Online. So plan for Exchange Online. What do you need to do? How do you do things in a hybrid scenario? This is in this exam as opposed to the other exam. The other exam, again, mainly is identity-based. Manage Link global external communication settings. Know how to configure Link so it works for everybody in a certain way, not just certain pieces. Now again, a lot of these things, a lot of these questions might be not necessarily real world or how your environment works or how you'd want to do it in your environment. Know all the options. Know how things might be done in a global way as opposed to what you want to do or how you're doing it in your environment. So let's do another question. Configure Exchange Online and Link Online. So you need to migrate your Office 2010, your Exchange 2010 organization of 1,001 users to Office 365. You want to preserve users OST files. Which migration methods can you use? So there's a couple things to pay attention to in this question. The number of users, and that might change an answer from you might do it this way to you might have to do it that way because of the number of users. You want to preserve the user's OST files. Pay attention to that. What do you want to do with the current mailboxes? So what do you want to do? Which migration methods can you use? So again, pay attention to how you might be able to do it. Look at the documentation. It may have been able to work in your environment, but exams will want you to definitely know what Microsoft wants you to do in every scenario, or the scenario that they want you to take a look at. So be familiar with the Office 365 migration options and source version and size requirements. So another key in this question, Office 2010, or Exchange 2010, I'm sorry. So pay attention to the version, pay attention to the number of users, and what action you want to actually go forth and do.
Verbiage trick is says methods, so you're immediately looking for more than one. If it was in this bracket, brackets, and that's different, but.
So, in review, we took a look at the Microsoft certifications. We took a look at what the certifications are comprised of. David, my colleague, talked about how some of the exams have changed over time. We took a look at some of the exam tips. David went over a lot of exam tips, things like how many questions are in the exam, some other tips that we may have. We also introduced the Office 365 MCSA certification. We went through a lot of objective domains. We looked at the weights of those objective domains in each exam. Looked at some of the subtopics. We went over some of the subtopics, and we also looked at the differences between the two exams, identity management versus Office 365 services. Yes, sir?
So if you go upstairs, what preparatory material is available for these two exams?
Right now, you can go up there and look at Microsoft Virtual Academy. You can also access the internet on the study hall machines and go to the URLs. Go to the exam URLs on the Born to Learn or the Microsoft Learning. Say again?
An MSDN subscription, we could probably find stuff out there.
Not on those computers. It's just general internet access. But what I would say is go to the exam page, like the Born to Learn, Microsoft Learning. And it will actually have, in those objective domains, links or study links where you can go directly to TechNet and look at all of these objective domains and look for very specific study material.
There are very good deployment walkthrough guides, step-by-step of taking
Yes.
every single code.
Great diagrams.
It's a lot of time, but everything is there. Okay? Everything is there.
Yes, that's another very good resource. Also go to the Microsoft area out here in the expo hall. Go talk about identity, talk about fast track deployment, talk about ADFS. There's people out there talking about these things right now. And I actually went and talked about how can we federate identity in between two Office 365 tenants. There's individuals out there that are able to answer difficult questions. So if you have questions about the exam, or even go out there and learn what's going on that you might need to do for your own environment.
And there's for both a 5-day instructor-led training. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. So the one great thing about thanks for bringing that up. So the 5-day instructor-led training, for these certifications, it's really great. It's a new type of training. So if any of you have gone to instructor-led training, you have 5 days, you're sitting in front of a computer, you have VMs or something similar on that computer in the Learning Center. You go home to your hotel, you may not be able to access it. You go home after the class, you may not be able to continue your training or your learning. With this new Office 365 training course, we actually provision the on-prem resources, AD, ADFS, Exchange, things like that, in VMs out in Windows Azure. So you're able to interact with on-prem resources in VMs in an IaaS, and IaaS scenario. So you can continue to learn as long as you have a subscription, as long as your subscription is valid. So if you have a trial, that'll be 90 days. Or if you have your own subscription, you can use those on-prem resources to try out, to practice, to do all of these scenarios in your exam after you take the course. So there's a lot of great resources with that course, and it's a great course too. I've taught it so far. I've had a couple beta teaches for it, some great feedback. You also get a practice Office 365 tenant that you can work with, so you're not necessarily using your own, or you're not ruining your own while you're playing around and learning. And it's a great course. So here, breakout sessions. There's some great breakout sessions here. Labs. So we have a hands-on lab area. There's some great Office 365 resources in the hands-on lab area. You can sit, you can do some hands-on labs, do some learning there. Excuse me. Self-paced. Now, breakout sessions as we know them, and then hands-on labs, just self-paced, go down there and learn. And I'll be out at the Ask a Geek, Meet and Geek, Ask the Experts, things like that. So,
Will this labs be online after the event?
yes, so hands-on labs will be available after the event, which is a great, great resource also.
When? Right after? Or?
Generally, it's about a week to 2 weeks after Tech Ed concludes. The vendor that is putting together the hands-on labs will make them available to everyone. So this is the end of the exam prep. Are there any questions? Anything I can answer? Excellent. All right. So hopefully we're all here for what we're seeing projected, the Office 365 MCSA exam. So before we get started, one thing I want to mention about this session. So in the time we have here, I'm not going to teach Office 365. I can't do that in an hour and a half. I'm going to teach things like what to expect on the exam, what types of questions, things like takeaways for the objective domains, which you should look at or look forward to learning before you take an exam. We're going to run through fairly quickly. We may not spend all of the time we have allocated for this session. The deck is fairly small. So again, if you're here to learn Office 365 or learn what may be here on the actual exam, or you want me to tell you answers to the exam, it's not what this is today. It's more learning more about Microsoft certification, what's in the objective domains, and what you should take away for study items. So, with that, Neil McPhee, I'm a technical advisor at Harvard Business School. We are now implementing Office 365 where I work. We are really looking at several main things right now, moving our MySites to OneDrive for Business. We are looking at Exchange, moving our Exchange out there to Office 365. And we're doing several other implementation steps. And what I do, in addition to my technical advising, I'm an MCT. So I teach classes there at Harvard Business School, mainly to staff, mainly to other staff in other campuses. So I have a lot of individuals. And Office 365 is very hot right now, especially in universities, especially in large corporations. So get a lot of experience training there. So technical advisor, I do a lot of proofs of concept. I do a lot of coding. I do a lot of server builds. I do a lot of configuration planning, and mainly helping to advise the C-level what directions they should go, what pieces should be put in, and just think of Tech Ed as going to a big place where you're learning a lot of different things. Tech Ed is where I go and bring a lot of that information back and say, what should we do in education? Or answer questions about how do we make this happen in an education type setting. So feel free to contact me via any of these methods here. So Twitter is my preferred. I tweet all the time. I get in touch with people all the time. Skype me if you have any questions about certification in general, or if you have any questions about Microsoft Office 365 certification, email me. I'd be happy to answer any emails you might have. And I'm an MCT, MCSA for Server 2012, MCSE for SharePoint 2013. I passed that free 74409. I actually do a lot of virtualization work. You can say you have increased confidence in your abilities at work. You can say, I have passed this exam. I know what the heck I'm talking about. These are the products that I've taken a Microsoft exam about. You can say, here's my passing score sheet. I know all of these items that are on the passing score sheet. Enhanced product knowledge. In the process of studying for an exam, you're going to see things that you may or may not work with every single day. You're going to study items that you may or may not work with. And in studying for a Microsoft exam, you're going to expand your product knowledge, which is a great thing. Learn about certification to educate your coworkers and bosses. So you can actually learn more about the program, learn more about certification, bring in your coworkers, say, hey, why don't you work with me? Let's study together. Let's pass this exam together. So you can work on certification. You can also tell your bosses how much it matters and how much work you're putting in learning new areas in the product that you're studying for the exam. And hopefully let your boss know that, hey, me and my coworker, we're studying some great things. So for your career, makes a great commitment. So you're going to have to commit some time to a certification. You're going to have to study. You're going to have to actually go to the testing center. You're going to have to commit some money to taking that exam. And of course, making sure you know what that exam is covering. So it shows drive and initiative again. You're going and studying, making sure you go from the context of proofs of concept and things like that. So had the opportunity to do that exam, passed it successfully. It's a great exam. Still working on my Office 365. So I'm here telling you based on things that I've learned in taking the exam and failing it. So don't feel bad about failing an exam. Yes, ma'am.
Is the exam now between 2013 and 2010?
For Office 365, the components that do have some SharePoint pieces in them, they do refer to SharePoint 2013. To SharePoint 2013. So what we're going to do here, we're going to talk about Microsoft certification. We're going to have some discussion about what certification is, how it's changed, how some of the questions a little bit more rigorous, a little bit more comprehensive. Actually, I should say a lot more. We're going to do some exam tips. We're going to do some introductions to these two exams. We're going to talk about the objective domains, the percentages of what's happening in each exam, what is the weight of any of those questions based on the objective domain, which is subject areas. So let's talk about Microsoft certification. So for you, why does Microsoft certification matter? So it's increased confidence. So after you pass an exam, you're certified 0 to passing an exam. If I was an employer and I saw one of my employees doing this, I'd say, okay, that person is driven. They want to go from just kind of knowing a few things to going and being able to pass an exam. So that's a great thing. So it sets you apart from your peers at review time. Yeah, you can do that. So recognition and completely achievable at Tech Ed. So we have exams here that are available. We have a certification center up on the 3rd floor above us here. Again, exams half off. They're only $75 US here, which is great. It's a great discount. We have a study hall that's available. Question? Okay. You look like you're about to say something.
I'm just leading in.
So we have a study hall with practice exams. We have a Safari 30-day subscription that's available. So any book that's in the Safari Books on Demand subscription. It's available here for free. So 30 days, you can pick any book, you can use it to study, and it's available after you're done with Tech Ed. So you go and sign in, get a 30-day subscription, use it after Tech Ed is over. In the study hall upstairs. It's right by the certification center. And you guys can take an exam here at Tech Ed, and again, certification is completely achievable. There's a testing center. It's great. So changes to certifications and exams. They're more relevant, the broader skill set, so it's testing